Entrepreneur, founder, author, and financial advisor, Marc Bernstein helps high-performing business owners turn their visions into reality. At March Forward, Marc and his partners and associates think out of the box to partner with their clients in regards to their visions for their lives, their businesses, and their legacies. And through his innovative work with the Forward Focus Forums, Marc connects entrepreneurs to resources that help to fuel their success. Founders Forum is a radio show and podcast where entrepreneurs share their journeys, reveal the stories behind their successes, and the lessons they've learned. Join Marc and his guests for a mix of inspiration, valuable insights, and a bit of fun. Now let's dive in.
Good morning, America. How are you? This is we are broadcasting here today from Babcock Ranch, Florida. A series of shows we're doing from here. The weather is beautiful. And I hear the weather is beautiful up in Philadelphia, where many of you will be hearing this radio show. And we have in the studio today our guests, and I'll formally introduce them in a minute, but Chris and Amy. And our topic of the day is going to be transition. And this particularly applies to Chris, who's the guest on this particular show, and Amy is the co-host. So Chris, we're going to talk about it, but you've gone through some transitions. What is your perception of transition? What's that mean to you?
In reflection on this question, preparing for the show, I feel like my entire life has been transitioning from one thing to the next. I went to Catholic school for my first 8 years of school and then transitioned to a military school, which may seem similar, but it's not. And then I transitioned from military school to the actual military, and then from there into college, and then from there into investment banking, and then into entrepreneurship. And there's always these like roles and identities that you have to accept when you move from one place to another. And sometimes that can be, it can be easy or it can be difficult depending on the circumstances. And so I think that I guess knowing where you want to go and then nailing the transitions is a good way to be successful through life.
Interesting. Amy, your thoughts about transition?
I think transition is really an interesting thing because also, much like you, I've transitioned a lot throughout my career. Even where I started, I don't think it was my intent to jump into transitions and everything early on, whereas you felt like your whole life was a transition. But throughout my career, same thing. Like we've really transitioned, the way I think about things, the way I do engineering as an engineer, and even how I'm approaching my company now. So transitions is just a natural part of life, but also really goes a lot into entrepreneurship. Yeah, for sure.
Having said that, and everyone in this room is an entrepreneur of sorts, one sort or another, and it really is helpful to be able to transition well when you're an entrepreneur, but not everyone transitions well. My wife is an example. We talked about this a little bit. She does not like leaving her comfort zone. We're talking about moving our physical house, our primary residence in Pennsylvania. That's not such an easy thing for her. I have a son who's in military school and had trouble with transitions. But I think so. They find different kinds of roles in life that are set up more comfortably. In our environment, though, transition is extremely important, and I think that's kind of a theme of the show that we talk about a lot. So let's introduce Chris and get into it. Chris Donnelly is a galvanizer who removes barriers to agency for mid-market CEOs. After selling his business in 2023, he's navigating his second curve of many, I have a feeling, from operator to advisor, right? Serving as a Vistage chair and strategic advisor. Chris helps stuck CEOs in the $30 to $200 million revenue range escape operational quicksand by building systems that solve problems without them. Drawing on frameworks from psychology, strategy, and power dynamics, he transforms decision paralysis into decisive action. He's proof that your next chapter can be more meaningful than your first. So welcome, Chris.
Thank you.
And also let me just say that Amy Wicks is CEO of Wicks Consulting, a engineering firm, and we'll hear much more about her on her show, which we'll also be recording today. So welcome, Amy. Thanks for being here.
Welcome.
So Chris, let's start out with, I know way back, I know about military school and all that, but maybe after college, you started a career. Why don't we talk about that?
Yeah, I think it's fundamental, or it's instrumental to talk about how I got there.
Yep.
Because coming out of college or coming out of high school, I lived in this rigid structure of military boarding school where every minute of every day
Valley
was planned.
Forge, right?
Valley
Yeah,
Forge
Valley
Military
Forge, yeah.
Academy. And leaving that and going to college was like going from one extreme to another. And that was a difficult transition for me. And I found myself in this spot where I was like, well, I'm not doing anything else. And my father's business was based in Lansdale at the time, and directly catty corner from there was the recruiting station. And so I remember one day riding my bike into Lansdale and walking into the recruiting station, interviewing all the recruiters, and the Navy guys like would drive me around as like an incentive to like get me to sign up. And I didn't want to leave right away because I was in college and I was hanging out with my friends. And so we had decided that I would leave in February. So February of 1998, I enlisted in the Navy, went on that journey for 5 years, did 2 deployments to the Gulf. I lived in Sicily for 2 years. It was a wonderful experience. And then coming out of that, I then went to work in the family business while I went to college. So I'm going to school full-time. I'm working full-time for my father. I'm learning his business. I'm doing these things. And it wasn't quite like what I wanted. And I arrived at this place where I was going to school for what was effectively investor relations or public relations. And I ended up teaching myself accounting at night and on the weekends. And I said, I'm either going to be a CPA or I'm going to be an investment banker. And I just happened to go to a career fair, and I got into Citigroup in an operational role, and then worked my way into investment banking from there. It took me several years to make the connections and to get into the program. And so I guess through 2006 through 2013, I was fully focused on working with big corporates, international businesses. I had a lot of foreign companies that I was working with. And so I got to see a lot of high finance at an interesting time within the financial crisis and coming out of that, and Dodd-Frank, and all the rules that were in place, and how people were resistant to mortgages and building. And so it was an interesting time to be alive in finance. And that was really where I grew up and learned, that most of life is really how hard you work and what your network looks like. And I carried that with me when I left Citigroup. What ended up cutting my Citigroup career short was my mother ended up coming down with pancreatic cancer in 2013. And that was, I guess, July of 2013. And then she passed in September of 2013. And my father at the time, he had already had some health challenges of his own. And he had decided to make this business a lifestyle business because he had a small mini stroke, and he had some heart issues. Mm-hmm. And so it was sort of this thing that they just had that sustained their lives. But now with her passing, he didn't have anything else beyond this business. He didn't know what he was going to do. He knew he wanted to retire. And at the time, there was no market for a residential plumbing and HVAC business. And so the business sort of needed me more than I needed it. And I guess in late that year, he asked me to come back. And so I took the leap from Wall Street back to Main Street.
And how did that transition feel? Because that was a big change. Right?
Yeah, it was tough. It was hard. I was traveling to New York City, and my office was in Tribeca, and I worked on the 35th floor. I looked at the Empire State Building every day. It was like it was magical. And
now you're in Lansdale.
And now I'm in Lansdale, Pennsylvania, like driving 7 miles from my house to this office that's in a not so nice area of Lansdale. And so like just the environment itself was a transition. And then the people, you're going from working with people that are, coming fresh out of Harvard Business School or Stanford Business School. And now I'm working with tradesmen.
Totally different cultures.
Totally different cultures and totally different types of people. And so having to adjust from working with, college educated people to blue collar people, not in a bad way, but just different people. And so I was seen as an outsider, even though I grew up in the trades. I worked in concrete when I was in high school, and I was an electrician in the Navy. And so I had the fundamentals, but it's like, I had a totally different experience. And so it was fitting in with these people was definitely a challenge.
By the way, before we go on, I should say this is Founders Forum. It's usually for founders of businesses. Amy's a founder of business. You're not technically the founder of this business, but when I heard your story, you kind of are, because you recreated the business. And that's what we're going to talk about, to a point where you were able to transition again. So that's the meat of the story, I think, here. Yeah. So let's talk about what happened then.
Yeah. So we had very early in my tenure there, I realized that we had one guy that was like 30% of our revenue, and he was a nice guy, and he did well, And I think we got into an altercation about, not an altercation, but we got into a discussion about something that I felt might have been an integrity violation. And, it was civil, and we had some words about it, and he ended up quitting. And so my father very quickly was like, well, that's a lot of revenue from the business.
Right.
And so we had to figure out what we were going to do. And we sort of looked at each other and we were like, well, I guess we'll start an HVAC business. And so, so within the plumbing business, we had some semblance of HVAC, but I figured it out. I pulled together my resources and learned residential HVAC as a system and as a business. And in the summer of 2015, we started that. We started that officially, and then grew that over the next several years to be about half the business.
And now, in the midst of all that, you're changing the business. You're changing the culture. And so, in fact, Amy, you might have a question about that, because I know there was a culture change that went on.
Yeah, I'm just interested in, as you were going through that shift and everything, and especially losing that much revenue just up front, and somebody that had all of those relationships, how did you use that then to bridge that gap and kind of adjust that culture that you had going on in that company? Because that's something I feel like everybody kind of struggles when they're going through some of those big changes.
Yeah. It's a great question, and I don't want to bury the lead. Like, I'm no longer afraid of losing revenue because of a person or a client or whatever, because of this instance, because you always sort of figure it out. But fundamentally, anybody that's buying a business or even taking it over a second generation business, or even businesses that have been around for a long time, where the owners have had some level of success, like, that's going to naturally move to be a lifestyle business for that person. And so whenever you come into a lifestyle business, like, that's really based on comfort of the owner. And so sometimes the standards and the rules and the culture gets relaxed around, being comfortable and just do your best, and we'll get by, and we'll figure it out if problems come up. And really it's about maintaining status quo, particularly for the ownership group or owner, so that they can have consistent cash flow and they can do what they want. And so when you come into a business like that and you're like, well, this is not my vision for what I want this to be, certain things have to be different, and fundamentally that starts with the culture. So I always like to use the analogy that Donnelly's was like Mary Poppins, right? We're very caring, and we wanted people to be good and to feel good about what they were doing every day. But at the same time, we're very performance oriented. And so being a CEO in an environment like that, or creating a culture like that, really makes you balance those two things, which if you plotted them on a graph would be at extreme ends of the spectrum. Extreme performance on one side where you don't care about people's lives and what they're doing, versus extreme caring where that's the only thing that matters. And really nailing that midpoint between balancing those two things, I think, is a difficult task.
Were you at this point? Were you building to sell at this point, or were you just trying to redirect the business at this point?
I always had in my mind that this was a I'll use the term flip. That it was like, this was a business asset that I could buy that I would eventually transition. Right. I didn't know when that would be. Like I said before, like when I bought the business, there was no market for these businesses. No one was buying these businesses. And It wasn't until 2017, 2018 where consolidation through private equity really started happening.
So you kind of fixed the culture, you expanded into HVAC. What happened now that brought you along on the journey towards selling?
So I think fundamentally the biggest step that founders and young CEOs can take is to really focus on the roles that are needed in the business, but not today. The roles that are needed in like a year or like 3 years, and create that org chart and figure out what all of the key responsibilities and key functions those roles need to carry out, and then look for people that are naturally inclined to fulfill those things. Right? Because that reduces the friction for when people come into the business. If you have a great culture and you're finding people that fit naturally with the roles that you have available for people, like those people are going to be intrinsically motivated to do a good job. And that lowers your barriers to having to manage people and to do these other things, and really opens up the door for inspirational leadership and to help people understand what the vision is, what the mission is. And we talk about sustainability, and it's like, if you're hiring people that all believe in sustainability and they all have great engineering skills, there's going to be a lot less friction to how that business proceeds in its arc than if you're hiring just engineers and you're going to try and teach them about sustainability.
Yeah. So you were really This sounds a little like EOS as an example. You're familiar with EOS?
I am, yeah.
And it sounds a little like, did you have any coaching or help with all this, or is this all coming from what you knew about business from corporate America?
I had three fundamental lessons that I learned. And I worked with a Swiss gentleman named Auke Leenstra when I was at Citigroup, and he was fundamental in teaching me this one key thing. And I remember we were doing a deal, and he said to me, leadership is you knowing where to be when you're needed there most, which is an art to getting that right. So that's number one. Number two, when I went to business school, I'm a Penn State MBA, and when I went to business school, I learned a lot about implementing change and affecting change through culture and through putting the right people in the right places. And then operationally, that was really hammered into me because I did hire an EOS implementer when I had the business. And that's a key function of EOS, is putting the right people in the right seats.
Interesting. So what other challenges were you having? We just have a little bit of time before the break, but what other kind of challenges did you face as you're building towards the sale?
I think most of the challenges are typically with personnel, really about professionalizing leadership and management. A lot of people become very loyal to the people that they have in their businesses as they grow, and that's wonderful. And that can also become a hindrance to the growth of the business because really nice people typically don't have the right leadership and management skills to be able to scale a business. And so this process of professionalizing management is something that I think all CEOs and all founders need to be engaged with. And I have a friend that told me this best once. He said, I have this horse ranch that I go to, and I hang out on this horse ranch, and I take care of the horses. And he's like, and the only thing I do when I leave the horse ranch is I go and I try and find people that are smarter and better at their jobs than I am, and the people that we currently have on the bus, and I convince them to come work with us. And so I'm always trying to build the next level of leadership team within the organization.
So right after our break, Amy's going to follow up with you on more questions about leadership. And with that, we'll take a short break, and we'll be right back on Founders Forum.
The Sattel Institute is the leading CEO member organization dedicated to corporate social responsibility. Under the vision and leadership of its founder, entrepreneur and philanthropist Ed Sattel, the Institute brings together CEOs in Philadelphia and other cities to support the nonprofit organizations that do heroic work in our communities. The Sattel Institute believes that community is every leader's business. SI's members-only meetings and private CEO conferences give members the opportunity to hear from world-class thought leaders on crucial topics like AI, education, corporate philanthropy, and more. In addition, CEO members get the opportunity to share ideas and experience with their peers, like-minded CEOs who believe in the importance of giving back to the community and who understand the benefits companies get from embracing corporate social responsibility. The Sattel Institute charges no dues or fees. In order to join, member companies simply make a long-term commitment to the nonprofit of their choice. To find out more about membership and why so many leading companies are now part of the Sattel Institute, visit the organization's website at sattelinstitute.org. Sattel, S-A-T-E-L-L, institute.org. As Ed Sattel says, think we, not just me.
We are back on Founders Forum with our guest today, Chris Donnelly, and our co-host, Amy Wicks. And Amy, I know you had a follow-up question about leadership for Chris.
I do. I'm absolutely fascinated, especially as I'm growing a company in your leadership discussion. But what I've heard so far is how you can identify and hire some leaders, but also how you lead. How do you grow those leaders internally to your company to make sure they're moving up too and there's some consistency in the company?
Yeah. I think one, it's through intentional focus. Like you as the founder, you as the CEO, that has to be your priority. A lot of people I find are, I won't say distracted, but maybe sales is their strength, or that they've fallen into that role because that's the thing that they feel like that they can provide for the business the best. But if you're really interested in having a business that I'll call autonomous or that works without you, it's an intentional practice of working with people and keeping a one-on-one schedule and being consistent and being disciplined. And it doesn't take a lot of like rocket scientry to do this. I think it's a bit of coaching that's consistent, that compounds over time. Most people want only 15 to 20 minutes of coaching a week, but these people want a part of your time as the CEO and the founder. And so one of the gifts that you can give them is your time to be there, to listen, to not give them solutions, just to listen to them. And I think that's foundational. Two, it's then being consistent with it. Like a lot of people will set a one-on-one schedule and then they'll just abandon it because priorities, because, we have to go talk to this client or we have to go sell this thing. Like you have to make an intentional,
or because they think everything's okay now, and then they
or they think everything's okay, right? And they move on to doing other things, and you're sort of leaving people behind when you do that. And this concept of of growing leaders within your business is great. And I think as CEOs and as founders and as business owners, like we have this we constantly have this make or buy decision that we're making about what we're going to do, whether it's with parts, whether it's with supplies, and it's also like, are you going to hire people or are you going to train people? And I think it's a mix of both that you need to do. It's sort of like building a professional sports team. You need to make a lot of good draft picks, and you need to invest in hiring professional coaches and leaders to train those people. And you also need to find one or two free agents that are going to be A players from outside the industry that really bring offsetting skills that the organization doesn't have. So if you're really strong in engineering, but you're not really strong in HR or sales, hiring an A player might be the key to like unlocking the rest of the organization. So you're trying to balance, like you're always looking at like, what are my strengths and what are my weaknesses? And if you can't necessarily like through your own will and effort and patience grow leaders into those things, they're not naturally inclined, then that's where you'd be bringing people in to supplement, what you need in those skills. And then a lot of your time then becomes building the team, and you're the coach, you're the leader, you're the person that's putting everybody in those roles. You're sort of directing those roles, architecting the plays, making sure everybody knows the plays, and it's sort of endless when you get into this, because it's like I had a business school teacher once that really opened my eyes to this, because I'm very impatient. So I'm like, I want things to work, I want them to work now, and I never want to have to go back to it. But this professor said to me, he said to the whole class, he said, in this room today, as managers, as leaders, as CEOs, you have to come to terms with the fact that your job in this business is to repeat yourself in new and different ways forever. You have to really come to terms with that if you want to be successful in this. And I took that to heart, and I'm a good storyteller, so I found ways to just repeat myself endlessly about culture and about behaviors and about the things that mattered, and making up stories about why it's important. And the more you can do things like that, it sort of reinforces the lure of the business. And that lure is why people keep coming back and they keep staying.
That's something I knew intuitively, but I'd never heard it said like that. So it's great.
There's heroes and there's legends in every story. And like your business today, like you're building those stories about those people.
I want to move on because time runs fast on this show. I want to get to, so you built the business, now revenues are growing. Your infrastructure is in place. Your employee culture is good. Mm-hmm. How did you come about to sell? And then we want to talk a little bit about what you did after that, what you're doing today.
Sure. The brief story about the sale is that I had hired key leadership. So I'd gone outside the business to hire key leadership. I hired a really great professional manager who was able to bring the team together and do a lot of the things that we were talking about. And him and I worked really well together to try and affect the culture. He was also a great manager of resources, and so he was able to bring some things together that I couldn't do. That freed me up then to look at the market to see what was going on. And now we're in the 2021 timeframe.
So just stepping back for a second, you started to be able to focus on your unique abilities.
Right.
And one of that was finance and figuring
exactly
out.
Right. So. And I had bootstrapped this business since I bought it, and so it was like we were growing. We had gone when I came back. We had 12 people. We now had 65, and it's like, how do you fund all this stuff? And it's like that becomes a drain, particularly when you're reinvesting in people. There's long payoff cycles on those things, and then three things happened that we really needed to address. One, consolidation was rampant at this point in 2021. And so most of the businesses in our area have been consolidated. So unit cost pressures existed. So people were buying equipment, supplies for much less than we were able to. Two, we needed a capital injection to be able to do a lot of marketing, because when you're in home services, you're looking to be top of mind and then be able to respond fast for people when they need you. A lot of that is TV advertising, which in Philadelphia is expensive. And then the third thing is we needed to move. We needed to get into a bigger building so that we could build training space to do technical training. And the technical training is like one of my key misses from like 2014 when I first came back. But those were the three things that we needed to solve for. And so because I had built the leadership team, because we had built the culture, I had time and space to then go out and find, market the business, created a financial model, took it to market, interviewed partners, looked for the right people that I thought were going to be sustainable and carry the name forward into the future.
What was the whole time frame of all this?
It took me about 10 months. To find the final four.
But from start to finish, from when you came in, it was only like about a 3-year period. Right?
Oh no! So I bought the business I started working in the business in 2013. I bought it in 16.
Okay, so you
and
bought it.
I sold it in 23.
Okay,
so it was a 10-year. It was a 10-year project overall, and only the last year of it was spent on access to capital and financing.
How did it work out? Because I hear a lot of mixed stories about selling to private equity. How did it all work out for you?
From my perspective, and I still talk to the CEO of the business today. The guy that I hired is still the CEO of the business today.
Nice,
which I think is that's a strong signal. It's been 2.5 years, and so from what I hear from him, they're doing exceptionally well. So the business is thriving. They've moved into a new building. They advertise on TV now. They have more meeting rooms and training space than I ever could have imagined. They have national level deals with equipment providers. So all three of the problems I was seeking to solve got solved, and solved quickly. So from my perspective, like I think it's a win for me because like I achieved my objectives. The business, I believe, is almost doubled at this point. So I believe that for the new owners, the business has achieved its objectives. And for the people there, most of the people in the management team is still there as well. And so I think that that's a win-win-win for everybody.
So far, a happy ending, which you don't hear all the time. That's great. So what happened? You sold the business. You made a big transition. Came back to Pennsylvania from New York. Totally different kind of culture, and now you no longer have a business. What happens then? This
is the hard part, is that once you complete the entrepreneurial cycle of like buying, building, and then selling, nobody really tells you that like you sort of hit a hard wall at the end of that. And it's like, who am I?
Right.
You're all of a sudden, you're like, now I have to answer all these questions that maybe I've been avoiding for the last 20 years.
Right.
And so it's been a journey of self-discovery. And I feel like the project that I'm continually working on is me now, and what are the things that I want to see in my future, and how do I want to live? And so I've finally had enough space to be able to look at who I am and say, what do I value, and what does that look like to live like that, and how do I live like that every day? And that's a process, and that takes time. And there's a lot of science around post-exit founders and post-exit CEOs, where there's a learning curve, there's a deep depression that happens. It takes 2 years to go through that curve, and then I've learned from other people that in midlife there's another curve that you have to that you have to address, and I'm on that curve now too, and so I'm dealing with like multiple things at once, and it sounds.
Did you buy the red Porsche?
No, it's green. I had two green ones.
I teed that one up for you.
Yeah.
So where are you? But what are you are working professionally?
No, I am.
So let's talk about that.
So I enjoy golf. I enjoy my time. I enjoy working with CEOs. I really love talking to people and hearing their stories and
as Vistage Chair,
and even just sort of personally, just talking to entrepreneurs and talking to business owners. But I have my Vistage Chair. I launched my Vistage Group. Vistage is the world's oldest and largest CEO coaching and mentorship organization. I have
formerly tech.
Yes. And I have a group that's 11 CEOs, about to be 12.
Very nice.
I'm very pleased with that. I have plans to grow that group this year. I'm really looking for CEOs that are either founders, second generation, first-time CEOs, first-time presidents, family businesses, people that are going through transitions, either from lifestyle businesses to growth businesses, or personal transitions from family member to owner, or something like that.
We have very little time left, but just a quick question: your 10-year vision. If we're talking and it's 2036, you and I, and we're on the golf course, and I say to you, "How'd you do the last 10 years, Chris?" What would that look like for you?
2036, I'll be 56. And I have visions of like living in a place like this, right, on a golf course, and where it's warm most of the year.
We're going to talk more about that today.
Yeah, and when I sold the business, the guy who bought the business, he was like, "What are you going to do?" And I'm like, "I don't know." And he was sort of pressed me on it, and I was like, "Well, I'm going to do cool stuff with cool people," and that's how I left it. And he was like, "All right," and so here we are, cool stuff with cool people.
I have to tell you, we are out of time. Time flies so fast on the show. Thank you, Amy, for being here with us and co-hosting. Chris, thanks so much for being a guest. Thank you all for listening, and we'll talk to you next week on Founders Forum.
Founders Forum was brought to you in part by March Forward, LLC. We partner with entrepreneurs like you to assist in accomplishing your future vision, your life, your business, your legacy. Comprehensive wealth planning that starts with you, not a product. We hope you enjoyed your time with Founders Forum and that you found something of value to take with you throughout your day. Join us again next week for another episode of Founders Forum on WWDB 860 AM Philadelphia or on your favorite podcast streaming service. Securities offered through DFPG Investments, LLC. DFPG. Investment advisory services offered through Diversify Advisory Services, LLC. Diversify. DAS and DFPG are affiliated entities. March is unaffiliated with DAS and DFPG. Members FINRA/SIPC. The information provided in this podcast is for informational and educational purposes only and should not be interpreted as investment advice. The views expressed are those of the host and guests and do not necessarily reflect the views of Diversify or DFPG.